Hey, everybody, and welcome to another day in the Smart and Empowered Parent Summit. I am so excited to have today as our guest, Laura Reagan, who's going to be talking about parenting through your own trauma. And I'm really excited about this topic because I think it's something that we don't always think about, but it's something that once we have awareness of, we can definitely use it to enhance our parenting and enhance the way that we work with our children. So, Laura, thank you so much for being on. Can you take a moment to maybe tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm a clinical social worker in just outside of Baltimore, Maryland, and I'm in private practice. And so I mostly work with individuals and families who have experienced trauma, often abuse trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I have a podcast.
Yes, you do. It's a great podcast too. We can definitely talk about that. Yeah. So before we jump into your expertise and what you do, I wanted to start off the interview by asking you, what do you think it means to empower parents?
Well, to me, empowering parents means just helping parents connect to their own strength as parents, that they may be when they show up for therapy or they show up in wanting therapy for their kids. They may be thinking, I don't know what to do. I'm lost. I don't have these skills, when really they're there. They're just maybe some other emotions getting in the way, fear and being overwhelmed and, being in new situations, or even their own trauma symptoms could be interfering. Right. So yeah, just helping them connect to what is already there, their strengths.
And I think that's really helpful because I think sometimes we don't realize how much our own stuff does kind of inform what we do and the decisions that we make as parents. So can you share a little bit about how you use your work to help parents feel empowered, even though they may be living with their own trauma narratives?
Sure. So my practice is kind of a mix of kids and adults. And when I work with kids, I work with the parents too, of course.
Right.
So when I'm working with the parents, if the child has trauma, a lot of times the parent has had their own trauma too. Mm-hmm. And when we've experienced trauma, it can just make you kind of feel lost in who you are and not connected with how you know yourself to be. And just, it can make you feel lost and alone and scared and overwhelmed and sad. So if I'm working with a child and the parent brings them, then I would talk with the parent about their own experiences of trauma and kind of try to connect with the parent. And oftentimes, the parent has a feeling of like, what about me? Nobody, my child, everyone wants to help my child, but no one wants to help me.
Right.
And it can be really hard to have the parent really most engaged to help the child when they feel like, no one's paying attention to what they need, right, which can be kind of like a reenactment of their own trauma experience, So connecting with the parent and helping them understand how they feel and their reaction to trauma and how it's influencing how they interact with their child is really important. And then if I'm working with an adult client who is also a parent, but I'm not working with their child, parenting always comes up in sessions and, oh, my kids are so, they're acting out and I don't know what to do. And, again, it's that feeling of powerlessness and not lack of competence in parenting, not knowing what to do. So in helping the parent recover from their traumatic experiences, I can help them connect better with their kids, because one of the big things that happens with trauma is when you feel isolated and your trust is affected, it's harder to connect with even your kids.
Yeah. That makes sense. So, I wanted to back up a little bit because I wanted to know a little bit more, especially for people who are listening to this and maybe trauma or the idea of trauma and the way it affects us, it might be a new concept. So can you tell us a little bit about what trauma actually is or how someone can identify their own traumatic narrative?
Okay, sure. It's kind of a complicated concept, but basically trauma is when you go through a terrible experience and you feel powerless. So it can be anything from starting in childhood. It can be anything from something that happened when you were literally born, a birth experience. It can be how well your primary caregiver really connected with you in your infancy and throughout your earliest development. So attachment trauma is related to maybe having a parent who wasn't able to really be attentive to your emotional needs, whether it was because they were struggling with their own trauma, they were depressed, or they were, they had to be gone all the time because, maybe they were a single parent working 2 jobs and, so you had a lot of different people that were taking care of you, or so some of those are just a couple of small examples of what can cause attachment trauma.
Right.
And then also traumatic events can be any childhood abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. So not having your physical needs met, like not having enough food to eat, not having a safe place to live, clothes to wear, that, or just no one being attuned to your emotional needs. You feel scared and no one understands how you're feeling and they don't try to comfort you and you're just kind of alone to deal with your feelings.
Right.
And then of course, physical abuse, we know what that is.
Right.
And sexual abuse
right.
Is another type of traumatic event. And then one thing that a lot of people don't realize is witnessing domestic violence, common traumatic experience for kids.
Yeah.
So I've talked to many, many people who may have been in an abusive relationship when their child was 1 to 2 years old. And, because kids that young are barely beginning to speak, we think that they don't remember.
Right.
And so the child may not have the words to say what they saw and how they feel about what they saw, but it does affect them.
Right.
And you'll see that if, I've talked to children who witnessed severe domestic violence when they were like 1.
Yeah.
And you really can't talk and you really think you can't remember that. And then maybe talk to the kid when they're 10 and the mom doesn't even know the kid saw what happened.
Right.
And the kid gives like a detailed description or draws, because a lot of times it's hard in words, but they draw out like what happened.
Right.
And, then that kid who's 10 is in school zoning out, having these flashbacks to an experience that they don't even know how to name.
Right.
And everybody thinks, oh, this kid doesn't pay attention, or they have an attention deficit issue.
Right.
And really they're having trauma flashbacks and they don't have the language to even explain what's happening.
Right.
So that's a common experience. And, people will say, I don't know that, the child's never experienced any trauma, but then, I don't think they knew about that, but I was in an abusive relationship. And, if someone's in an abusive relationship, they're just trying to survive and get through it and hopefully escape from the abuse and keep their kids safe.
Right.
But the child knows when the parent's in distress.
Yeah.
And it's nobody's fault, but it is a traumatic experience that can affect a child. So for the parent to be aware that, a lot of times as parents, we might think, well, I got out of that abusive relationship, so I think I'm fine now.
Right.
But if they never, if they're still like affected by it, and there's many different ways we can be affected, then it may be affecting their parenting in ways that they don't even realize.
Right. And, before we get into how can parents really look at it and see what parts of their parenting might be affected by their own childhood experiences, their own life experiences, I really want to say that I think it is really empowering to feel like I know now what it is that's triggering me, because I think a lot of the times parents feel like this is the kid's behavior that's triggering them. And on the surface, it is. If your kid's having a meltdown, if your kid's refusing to do chores or refusing to get things done in the house, that is the surface idea. But that underlying idea is that some of those defiant behaviors that we see in kids, it triggers our own stuff.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly. And, often it's somehow they remind you of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And when you were a kid, if you did that, you would get hit.
Yes.
So it's like your kid does it, it triggers you to remembering consciously or unconsciously. You know, it may be like a body memory, it may be a flash of a thought that you don't even
Right.
really notice,
Right.
or even an image in your mind that you see that you don't even
Mm-hmm.
really like interpret or process. It's just
Right.
a quick thing, and then next thing you know, you're so furious with your child, and you go from 0 to 60,
Right.
and it's completely out of proportion of what's really happening.
Right.
That can be a clue that there's something else going on.
Yeah, and I think that I like that terminology that you just used, which is when that's happening, when you feel a trigger that's infuriating you so much, that could be a really good sign that this might be tied to something bigger than just this moment with your child right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one thing that's really common is for parents who were physically or sexually abused
Mm-hmm.
to become triggered when their child reaches the age that they were, either when the abuse first started or when something really significant happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I often hear from parents who, maybe they have a 4-year-old, maybe it's a mom with a 4-year-old daughter, and her sexual abuse began when she was 4.
Mm-hmm.
Now she sees her 4-year-old daughter, and suddenly she's really worried about, my daughter seems curious about sex. Is this normal?
Mm-hmm.
Or, really overprotective
Right.
towards the child. Oh, she's never going to a sleepover.
Right.
I don't care, not till she's 18. I don't
Right.
trust anyone.
Right.
I don't leave my child with a daycare provider or any babysitters. I don't trust anyone.
Right.
So those are some common examples of things that the parents may be triggered and they don't even really realize it.
Right. Right. Because again, and I know you know this, but when you have certain traumas, especially if they're like the bigger ones, we tend to be able to, our mind tends to protect ourselves from that trauma. So we might have even forgotten the impact that it had on us at that time in our lives.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And we really, I think we do this. It's so weird if you understand about child development, it's actually really weird, but we think like, hey, I'm an adult now. Like that was a long time ago. I don't even, that doesn't affect me.
Right.
People will say all the time, you mean to tell me that I'm 50 years old and I feel this way because I was sexually abused when I was 8? And I'm like, yeah. I'm telling you because, if there's some other explanation that makes more sense, okay. But, if you look at it as a therapist, if you look at it through a trauma lens, like, is there any trauma that could explain this?
Yeah.
So often that's really what's going on.
Right. Right. So then let's shift into this idea of how can parents begin to not only just identify what parts of their trauma narrative may be showing up in their parenting, but what can they do to feel confident to get through that, even if they don't have time for therapy or they don't always have time to work on that because for whatever reason, we live very busy lives. How can a parent become, okay, as they're listening, they might think, oh, there is something in my life that, Laura's talking about that I can see play out. Now, how do I deal with that? How do I feel empowered and confident dealing with that and still trying to raise my child and not, make different decisions with my child?
Yeah. So what I think is that for any parent, if when you're dealing with your child's behavior, because it's like as parents, we want to teach our children and we want them to grow up to be well-adjusted adults.
Right.
So as you're trying to teach them and guide them, behavior is the biggest thing that tends to cause problems, right? Like, oh my God, my kid's doing this and I can't make them change that.
Right.
So focus on how you feel. Like ask yourself, so my kid's been lying and I'm so furious that my kid's lying and I just don't know what to do. So notice how you feel, like check in with yourself, like, what is this, what am I feeling right now?
Right.
And really you can do some mindfulness to really tune in with yourself. But even just if you take a minute and just be like, it feels like, I don't know, I feel scared. I don't know why, but I actually feel scared. And, you might figure out when you think about it that you're scared your child's going to get in trouble and your child's going to have some problem that they won't be able to overcome. And You don't want them to end up in jail.
Right.
I mean, we hope our kids won't go to jail. So it's noticing how you're feeling. And then if there is some trauma in your own history, you could ask yourself, do I feel like, does this feel like another time? Is there anything about this that seems familiar, maybe from when I was a child? And that's a good way to, easily, I mean, if it's lying, the parent can say to themselves, well, when I was a child, if I was lying, my mom would wash my mouth out with soap, and I was really scared when that happened. So with that, the parent may be reacting really strongly to the lying, which, as any behavior, it's something that you can address and you can overcome. But, it may be triggering that childhood experience for the parent. And then, so you can kind of take care of yourself before you try to address the child's behavior and, stop and say like, okay, that was really hard when I was a kid and I didn't like that. And how do I want to handle this? Like, do I want to do the same thing to my child? Well, I didn't like it. So, I mean, and did that make me not lie? No, it just made me better at hiding, what I was doing.
Yeah.
So, how can I actually address what I really want is just for the child not to lie, and to know that lying is not okay. And how can I get there? So it's kind of like trauma makes you react really fast.
Yes,
I mean, it's like fight or flight, it's the fight or flight response is a part of trauma. And, so something may happen and suddenly you're boom, you want to fight.
Yes.
And so
exactly
stopping and breathe, just take some deep breaths in and out, like 5 deep breaths in and out, will help you kind of calm yourself down. And then you can say, okay, like, what do I need to do here? Because it's not like if you don't address it right at that very second, you miss your opportunity.
Right. And, I think there are a few things that I really appreciate about what you were saying. And one is what I like to call reflective parenting, which is this idea of when you get triggered that way, when something comes up, to really stop and think what you said, is this something that I've had to deal with in my childhood? And how did my parents deal with it? How did I feel about it? What did I think about it? Did it change my behavior? Which I think is really huge, to think about, okay, I want to do that same thing to my kid, but then to be realistic about when my parents did it to me, it actually didn't change my behavior. So what can I do now to kind of help change this behavior? Because you do know the trajectory of some of these behaviors. Lying has a trajectory, hitting other people has a trajectory, not being able to handle my emotions has a certain trajectory that I know as a parent, I have to kind of change now. But I really like that idea of saying, if I'm triggered like this, that should be a red flag to stop, think, get reflective before I even try to attempt to change what's going on for my kid.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And another thing is to, think about where the child is in their developmental level. Like if it's like a 3-year-old and they tell a lie, like, are they really going to understand that that's wrong? I mean, they don't know the difference between reality and fantasy when they're that young. So expecting, when you're saying like, lying is bad, and they're like, what? They're not getting it.
Right.
So, you have to consider the developmental level, and with that, what need are they meeting with their behavior?
Yeah.
And is there another way to meet that need that's, we would say like a pro-social way, a way that isn't, against the rules of society, and will still get them what they want, but in a way that is, positive.
Right. And so, one thing that I'll ask too, and this is kind of playing devil's advocate a little bit, but what do you say to the parents who may be listening and might be like, well, I don't have any trauma, or I already dealt with that trauma, so it's not showing up. I know that's not what's showing up. How can a parent get in tune with things that might not be these big, physical, sexual, emotional traumas, but they might be maybe smaller little things that have happened in their life that they don't even recognize were traumatic?
Yeah, and that's a big challenge. And, what I've seen is the more traumatic events somebody's had in their life, the less likely they are to really recognize the impact, because they kind of stay just in that numb state a lot. So, and I want to make a quick point about that. One thing I didn't really say is attachment trauma is so different because, you might say, Well, I don't know. I mean, my mom was home with us. She walked me to school every morning. She made my lunch. She always baked cookies and, she was like the team mom for my soccer team.
Right.
So I don't know what you mean when you say that
Right.
maybe my emotional needs weren't met.
Right.
And, if you think about it, it's like, well, when you had problems, like, did you know how to handle them? Did anyone help you? Who helped you deal with your emotions, and who taught you how to handle them? And, people will so often say, well, nobody was really, I was just kind of like, be quiet, go away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or my mom was so busy with us 8 kids that she didn't have time to pay attention to somebody feeling scared because, they missed the bus.
Right. Right. And I think those are really important because saying like what you just said, I think happens a lot for families nowadays who are so busy. They forgot that not having someone care that I was really scared because I missed the bus, not having that kind of check when I was a kid. Now I see my kids having those same type of fears that I feel. Are you like, oh, you don't need to be scared about that, or oh, you can you'll be fine.
Yeah, like what's the big deal?
Right.
So what? You missed the bus, no big deal. And it's like, but the point is that they do feel upset and they need help soothing themselves.
Right. So if you didn't experience that as a kid, I think, and again, I can say that for me too, that was something that was very big. My mom always made sure my needs were met, but those were those smaller things that I needed. I just needed help to say it was okay to be angry or okay to be scared or okay to feel this way. Some of those needs weren't met. So now you get older and you have your tolerance level for people who deal with that is lower until you get healed, right? You can't really deal with your kid having a hard time because they can't find their lucky shirt for school. Right? It's like, just get over it and go to school.
Yeah. And meanwhile, the reason why the parent is so activated and so upset is because they're worried the kid's going to be late for school. So they're actually freaking out too. And they're like, come on, you gotta go. And the kid's like, you gotta find my shirt, And it's this big interaction of both people's anxiety.
Right. And so in that respect, how can, because I'm sure that's a definitely issue in many homes, that there are things that are going on that the kid is feeling on this level and you're feeling on this level.
Yeah.
How do we help? Because again, I think those are those smaller traumas that we don't think about, that we have an anxiety and the kid has one and no one's need is getting met in that moment. How do you help families to learn how to deal with those moments, even though there's that high anxiety that we're going to be late for school and we're going to be late for all these other things?
Yeah, good question. So I try to promote, when I'm working with families, I try to promote them having a lot of time together for playful things and to be able to be, connect in other ways like playing games or eating dinner together and just talking about like, say something great and something terrible that happened today, and each person goes around and they just get a chance to like hear each other's emotional experiences. One thing that I learned to do is teaching parents just to listen, ask the child, how was your day? And while they're answering, don't look at your phone. Don't be doing something else. Just give them your attention for like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And just listen to what they say. And then when they say, oh, well, I had a bad day today. Instead of saying like, were you on red? Did you get in trouble? Like, what happened? Just, oh, you had a bad day. Like repeat back what they say.
Yeah.
What was bad about it? And just keep asking open-ended questions until the kid doesn't have anything else to say for like 10 minutes. I mean, in our society, we never give somebody that kind of attention.
Right.
And that's what you're telling the child when you do that is like, you're important. I care about how your day was because you matter to me.
Right.
And it's this really small thing, but it makes kids feel seen and heard. And that's what like we all want.
Right. It's interesting that you share that because I think that's been a common theme with most of the experts that I've talked about. No matter what their topic is, it always boils down to that idea of connection and connecting to each other, that regardless of our own trauma narratives, regardless of behaviors we're seeing, when we can just stop and connect, it just changes dynamics so quickly. Quicker than punishment, quicker than yelling. It just changes those dynamics really quickly. So I love that that's become a common theme with most of the experts that I'm talking to.
Yeah, that's beautiful and really true. Yeah. And I really think that with connection, you can overcome so many other things. Because I have talked to people who experience trauma and don't show the signs of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right.
And it's all in did anyone listen to them? Did anyone believe them when they said what happened?
Mm-hmm.
Were they allowed to talk about their experience and say how they felt and supported and believed?
I agree.
If they were, it's this happened, it was hard, some short-term therapy,
Right.
and then they're good to go.
I agree.
But the ones who, have the most long-lasting effects, they feel their mom never understood how they felt, never really saw them for who they were, wanted them to be someone they weren't, try to be perfect all the time.
Right.
Or, they were just like a face in the crowd in a large family where nobody really got all that much attention.
Right. And, I think that's important that you just shared that. And you can let me know if this makes sense. But if you're a parent who is trying to parent through your own trauma narrative, whatever that looks like, I think that's why it's so important for you to not do it in isolation, to get that support,
yes,
support group, because maybe you didn't get it when you were growing up. Maybe you didn't get it as a young adult, but now you have the opportunity to kind of get that support, whether it be from other parents, other friends, whoever, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even have to be therapy.
Yeah.
But it's about the connection. You connect with other people, so you're not alone in your experience, right. And then you can connect better with your child.
Right.
It all interplays together.
Right. Which I think is
a support group, or it can be online. There's so many ways that you can do that now.
And I think which makes, kind of this idea of parenting through your own trauma more empowering, where it's like, I'm listening to this, I'm realizing my trauma, but I'm not alone. I don't have to just sit here and hold on to it by myself.
Yeah, and I think the most empowering thing about parenting through your own trauma is once you understand the impact of the traumatic experiences you've had, you can make sure that your child doesn't ever have to feel the way you felt. You can really do it differently.
Right. Definitely.
That's so powerful, because that's what we all want, is we want our kids to feel good.
Right. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
So we're coming up to the end of it. And, I've said a few times to my experts that we could pretty much do a whole 21-day summit just on their topic alone.
Oh, yeah.
Right? But I definitely want to leave some space for you to share with everyone who will be watching how they can contact you and how they can learn more about what you do.
Okay. So I blog semi-regularly, and you can find those on my website. And I have my podcast where I talk a lot about trauma and parenting, attachment and mindfulness and those kinds of things. So all of that is available on my website, which is www.laurareaganlcswc.com.
Awesome. And for those of you who are listening, if you didn't get a chance to jot that down, that's fine, because it'll be on Laura's expert page as well as in the emails that go out with the interview. So you can just go ahead and click those links and get access to Laura's podcast as well as her blogs.
Yeah, thank you.
So Laura, thank you so much for taking the time out to talk about this important topic. And I really appreciate the expertise and some of the strategies that you shared with us today.
Thank you, Mercedes. I was so pleased that you asked me.
Thanks so much.